Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about very interesting thing we call Earth the Blue Marble, a water world unique in a dry and hostile universe. It is a story we tell ourselves to feel special, a comforting narrative that places us at the center of the cosmic stage. But this is a story we tell ourselves to feel special, and the math suggests it is spectacularly wrong. If you were to take all the water on Earth, every ocean, every river, every cloud, and every ice cap, and roll it into a sphere, it would measure just 860 miles across. It would be a tiny, fragile drop compared to the rock it sits upon. But far beyond the asteroid belt, in the cold darkness, where the sun is nothing more than a bright star, there are worlds that make our oceans look like shallow puddles. The moons of Jupiter hold oceans 30 times deeper than the Marianas Trench, vast reservoirs of liquid water that have existed for billions of years. This presents a paradox that has kept astronomers awake for decades. How can liquid water exist so far from the warmth of the sun, where surface temperatures plunge to 200 degrees below zero? This isn't a story of cold, dark isolation. It is a story of hidden warmth, where the most life-sustaining environments in the galaxy are not bathing in sunlight, but sleeping beneath the ice. Tonight, we are going to peel back that ice. We are going to descend into the dark, pressurized depths of the Jovian system to understand why the universe is not a desert, but an ocean waiting to be discovered. By the end of this journey, you will look at the frozen shell of Europa and see it not as a grave, but as a womb. To understand the water that hides in the dark, we must first look at the light that revealed it. Our journey begins with a name that echoes through history: Galileo. 400 years ago, Galileo the man looked through a primitive glass lens and saw 4 points of light dancing around Jupiter. It was the first time human eyes had seen moons orbiting another planet, a discovery that shattered our belief that Earth was the center of all motion. But 4 centuries later, we sent a machine bearing his name to return the favor. The Galileo spacecraft was not looking with glass eyes, but with sensors designed to feel the invisible architecture of the Jovian system. It arrived in the mid-1990s, a robotic explorer drifting through the intense radiation belts of the gas giant. It was a mission of patience. The probe spent years threading the needle between the massive moons, collecting data points in a silence that we can barely imagine. And it was in this silence, during a close flyby of the moon Europa, that the magnetometer on board recorded something impossible. A magnetometer is a simple instrument in principle. It acts like a high-tech compass, detecting the direction and strength of magnetic fields. Jupiter has an immense magnetic field, a colossal cage of energy that rotates with the planet. As this field sweeps past a dead solid moon made of rock and ice, the magnetic lines should pass through it undisturbed, like wind passing through a ghost. The moon should be invisible to the magnetic eye. But that is not what the Galileo probe saw. As the spacecraft drifted over the icy white surface of Europa, the magnetic field lines of Jupiter bent. They twisted and warped, snapping back into place only after the moon had passed. In the language of physics, this was a scream. A dead rock cannot bend magnetism. To distort a magnetic field of that magnitude, the object passing through it must be conductive. It must be able to generate an electrical current in response to the changing magnetic environment. Rock cannot do this. Ice cannot do this. There is only one material common in the solar system that is capable of conducting electricity with such efficiency. This was the Galileo paradox. The data suggested that this frozen ball of ice, sitting in the freezing void 5 times further from the sun than Earth, was generating a magnetic signature that could only be explained by a global layer of conductive fluid. It was a revelation that changed sleepy science into an urgent mystery. The distortion implied that beneath the hard, radiation-blasted crust of Europa, there was a shell of liquid water, an ocean that covered the entire moon. Imagine the scale of this for a moment. On Earth, our oceans are merely a thin dampness on the surface, a film of water clinging to the crust like dew on an apple. The average depth of Earth's ocean is only about 2 miles. But the magnetic data from Galileo suggested that the ocean on Europa could be 60 miles deep. That is a volume of water so vast that it creates a second hidden world beneath the surface, a place where the concept of shoreline does not exist. But this discovery created a new problem, an intellectual knot that physicists had to untie. We know that water requires heat to remain liquid. On Earth, that heat comes from the sun, which bathes our surface in solar radiation, keeping us in the so-called Goldilocks zone. But Europa is far outside this zone. It drifts in the deep freeze of the outer solar system. By all conventional logic, any water there should be frozen solid, hard as granite, all the way to the core. The existence of the magnetic anomaly meant that something else was providing the heat. Something was keeping the heart of the moon warm enough to melt ice on a planetary scale. It wasn't the sun. It wasn't a burning core of coal or nuclear fire. It was something more elegant and far more powerful. The probe showed us the effect, but it did not show us the cause. To find the source of this heat, we have to look away from the moon itself and look toward the giant that holds it. We have to look at gravity. When we think of gravity, we usually think of it as a static anchor, the force that keeps our feet on the ground or the moon in the sky. But in the Jovian system, gravity is not a static hold. It is a dynamic, rhythmic violence. It is an engine. The Galileo probe helped astronomers understand that the magnetic bending was just the symptom of a much deeper interaction, a dance of mechanics that turns orbital motion into thermal energy. This brings us to a shift in perspective. We often view space as a place of stillness, where objects float in a vacuum, but the environment around Jupiter is not still. It is a churning, invisible storm of forces. The magnetic field lines that Galileo saw bending are like silk ribbons caught in a gale. Europa is not just sitting in this gale, it is reacting to it. The bending of the field is evidence that the moon is alive, in a sense, responsive, conductive, and hiding a secret that contradicts the frozen surface we see with our telescopes. The implications of this single data point from the Galileo mission ripple out to the edge of the solar system. If Europa can hide an ocean, then the definition of a habitable world changes overnight. It means we do not need to look for Earth twins huddled close to a star. We can look for ice shells in the dark. It suggests that the most common habitat for life in the universe might not be on a surface like ours, exposed to the sky, but sealed inside a protective sphere, safe from the radiation and the cold. We started by looking through a glass lens at a point of light. We ended up looking through an ice lens at a global sea. And as we drift further into this story, we will see that Europa is not alone. It is merely the first note in a symphony of hidden water that plays throughout the outer solar system. The Galileo probe gave us the first clue. But the physics of the system, the relentless rhythmic tug of the giant planet, provides the energy. It is a reminder that in the cosmos, nothing is truly isolated. Even a moon frozen in the dark is connected to its parent planet by invisible hands that are capable of warming the ice until it becomes a sea. Strategy block, audience phrases used: deep time, cosmic dance, forbidden physics, silent rhythm, viral hooks, the paradox of heat without sunlight, the clockwork of the moon's production script. To understand how a liquid ocean can exist in a vacuum where the temperature hovers near absolute zero, we must look away from the sun and look instead at the darkness between the moons. At this distance, the sun is merely the brightest star in the sky, offering no more warmth than a candle flickering in a winter field. By all the laws of thermodynamics, Europa should be a solid block of ice, frozen still from its surface to its core, yet we know it is not. The secret to this warmth lies in a phenomenon known as orbital resonance, a gravitational lockstep that turns the entire Jovian system into a vast, silent engine. It is a dance of precise mathematics. For every orbit that Ganymede completes, Europa completes exactly 2, and the volcanic moon Io completes exactly 4. This 1 to 2 to 4 ratio is not a coincidence. It is a self-correcting rhythm that has persisted for deep time, keeping the moons in a state of perpetual tension. Imagine holding a rubber ball in your hand and squeezing it rhythmically. As the rubber compresses and expands, the friction between the molecules generates heat, warming the material from the inside out. This is exactly what happens to Europa. As it circles Jupiter, the massive gravity of the planet pulls on it, stretching the moon into a slight oval shape. Then as it moves away, the moon snaps back into a sphere. But it is the other moons, Io and Ganymede, that prevent this orbit from becoming a perfect circle. They tug at Europa from the other side, ensuring that the stretching never stops. This constant kneading of the moon's rocky interior creates friction on a planetary scale. It is a form of forbidden physics to our intuition. Heat generated not by fire or fusion, but by motion itself, deep beneath the ice. This friction manifests as a geological heartbeat. The rock grinds against rock, releasing energy that rises through the mantle like steam rising from a cup of tea. It is this internal fire that fights back the freezing cold of space. It turns the bottom layer of the ice shell into slush, and then into water, creating a hidden sea that is kept liquid, not by the light of a star, but by the gravity of a planet. It is a world kept alive by the sheer weight of its orbit. Strategy block, audience phrases used: tiny blue dot, comforting darkness; data point, viral hooks; the contradiction, Earth is dry; cosmic vertigo, ocean depth comparison; key metaphor, the ice shell as a cosmic womb; production script, we call Earth the blue marble, a water world unique in a dry universe. But this is a story we tell ourselves to feel special, and the math suggests it is spectacularly wrong. If you were to take every drop of water on our planet, every ocean, river, cloud, and ice cap, and roll it into a ball, it would measure just 860 miles across. It would look like a tiny, fragile dewdrop sitting on a dry rock. We are not a water world, we are a desert with a very thin coat of paint. But 500 million miles away, in the freezing darkness, where the sun is nothing more than a bright star, the true oceans are waiting. Orbiting the massive gravity well of Jupiter are moons that defy the logic of the Goldilocks zone: Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. These are not merely icy rocks, they are the hidden aquariums of the solar system. The data suggests that beneath their frozen crusts lie global oceans of liquid saltwater that are up to 60 miles deep. To put that in perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into the deepest part of the Earth's ocean, it would hit the bottom in minutes. If you dropped it into the ocean of Europa, it would sink for hours. This presents us with a quiet paradox. How can liquid water, the most precious ingredient for life, exist in a vacuum where surface temperatures drop to 260 degrees below zero? By all accounts, these worlds should be dead, frozen statues. But they are not dead. They are merely sleeping under a heavy blanket. This isn't a story of cold, dark isolation. It is a story of hidden warmth, where the most life-sustaining environments in the galaxy are not bathing in sunlight, but resting safely beneath the ice. Tonight, we are going to peel back that ice. We are going to descend through the radiation belts of Jupiter, past the chaotic surface fractures, and into the dark, warm pressure of the deep. By the end of this journey, you will understand why the best place to look for life is not looking up at the stars, but looking down into the dark. And it begins with a pulse that was never meant to be heard. Strategy block, audience phrases used: primitive eyes, data point, the void, absorb and hope, sleepy science, viral hooks, the contradiction, dead rock versus living field, intellectual validation, magnetic induction, production script. To understand the source of this pulse, we must look back across 400 years of silence. When Galileo Galilei peered through his telescope in 1610, he saw 4 points of light engaging in a rhythmic dance around Jupiter, assuming them to be cold, dead spheres of rock and ice trapped in a gravitational cage. For centuries, this was the accepted truth, a simple model of a clockwork solar system where life was confined to the warm rocks near the sun. But when we returned in 1995, sending a spacecraft that bore his name to drift through that same system, the instruments began to tell a different story. As the Galileo probe swept past Europa, its magnetometer, a sensor designed to map the invisible lines of force, recorded a strange and unexpected bending of Jupiter's massive magnetic field. According to the laws of physics, a solid block of ice or silicate rock should be transparent to magnetism, allowing the field lines of the gas giant to pass through it like light through a clean window. Yet the data showed that the field lines were being diverted, wrapped around the moon as if they were flowing over a physical obstacle. This anomaly is a reminder that in the cosmos, invisible forces often speak louder than the things we can see with our primitive eyes. This phenomenon helps astronomers understand the interior of worlds without ever drilling a single hole. The bending of the field suggested that Europa was generating a counterfield, a magnetic response that can only happen if the moon contains a conductive layer. Pure ice is an insulator unable to carry a current. Solid rock is motionless and cold. The only substance common enough in the cosmos and conductive enough to bend these lines is water, specifically salt water. In that moment of silent data transmission, the paradox of the dead moon was resolved. We realized we were not looking at a solid ball of frozen water. We were looking at a planetary-scale ocean, hidden entirely from view, disguised as a frozen wasteland. The mathematics of induction suggest that this is not a small pocket of liquid, but a global sea, likely 100 kilometers deep. That is why, when we look at the dry, cracked surface of Europa, we are actually looking at the shell of a cosmic egg, protecting a volume of water that is more than double the amount found in all of Earth's oceans combined. It is a humbling realization. We often think of Earth as the water world, the blue marble unique in a dry universe, but the data from the Galileo probe suggests that we are actually the dry ones. The true reservoirs of life-sustaining fluid are not on the surface of planets near the sun, but hidden in the dark, kept liquid not by starlight, but by the crushing, warm embrace of gravity. This magnetic signature was the first clue, a digital whisper from the void, telling us that the environment we consider essential for life is waiting for us in the most unexpected place. But the existence of water creates a new problem for our understanding of the cold outer solar system. Water requires heat to remain liquid, and at this distance from the sun, the surface temperature hovers near 260 degrees below zero. By all logic, Europa should be a solid block of ice, frozen hard as granite. So what is keeping the heart of this moon warm enough to sustain a liquid ocean for billions of years? The answer lies not in the light of a star, but in the heavy, rhythmic dance of the moons themselves. Strategy block, audience phrases used: primitive eyes, data point, the void, sleepy science, viral hooks, historical parallel, Galileo versus probe, the alive moon, production script. To understand this rhythm, we must look back through the primitive eyes of our ancestors, specifically to a cold night in Padua in the year 1610. It was there that Galileo Galilei pointed a simple tube of lead and glass toward the wandering star of Jupiter and saw 4 small points of light arranged in a line beside it. For nights, he watched them drift, realizing with a slow, dawning wonder that they were not stars at all, but worlds circling another world. It was the first time humanity understood that we were not the center of the universe, but merely one data point in a vast orbiting system. 385 years later, we returned. But this time we did not send a man with a glass lens. We sent a machine named in his honor. The Galileo spacecraft arrived in the Jovian system in 1995, carrying instruments far more sensitive than the human eye, designed to feel the invisible forces that govern the dark spaces between the moons. It was a silent observer, drifting through the radiation belts of the giant planet, measuring the dust, the gravity, and most importantly, the magnetism. Jupiter possesses a magnetic field of immense magnitude, a colossal invisible cage that rotates with the planet, sweeping past the moons like the beam of a lighthouse. As the Galileo probe flew past Europa, its magnetometer, a sensor designed to detect the direction and strength of these fields, recorded something that should not have been there. If Europa were merely a solid ball of rock and ice, the magnetic lines of Jupiter should have passed through it undisturbed, like wind passing through a ghost. But the data told a different story. As the probe skimmed over the icy surface, the magnetic field lines bent. They warped and twisted around the moon, creating a distinct disturbance in the flow. In the language of physics, this is known as an induced magnetic field, and it presents a fascinating paradox. A dead rock cannot bend magnetism. For a celestial body to distort a field of this size, it must contain a conductive layer, a shell of material capable of carrying an electrical current. On Earth, we see this conductivity in the molten iron of our core, which generates our protective shield. But Europa is too small to hold such heat in its rock. The only other substance capable of conducting electricity this efficiently, and which could exist in such abundance beneath the ice, is a liquid electrolyte, salt water. This was the moment the paradigm shifted. The distortion was not a warning, it was a pulse. It was the signature of a global ocean, salty and deep, reacting to the rotation of Jupiter. As the giant planet spins, its magnetic field sweeps over Europa, and the ocean beneath the ice responds, generating a counterfield that pushes back. It is a silent electromagnetic conversation between the mother planet and its moon, a signal that proves the ice is not a tomb but a shell protecting a volume of water twice the size of all Earth's oceans combined. We call Earth the water world, but that is a title born of our limited perspective. We live on the surface, where the water is visible, reflecting the blue of the sky. But on Europa, the water is the sky, a hidden ceiling of fluid moving in the dark, warmed not by the sun, but by the friction of its own existence. Strategy block, audience phrases used: boiling water, data point, the void, cosmic cage, deep time, viral hooks, the paradox of heat, without light, domestic anchoring, paperclip, rubber ball, production script. This internal warmth presents a contradiction that puzzled astronomers for decades. In the standard model of our solar system, energy is a gift that comes strictly from the sun, radiating outward in diminishing waves until it fades into the cold silence of the outer planets. At this distance, 500 million miles from the solar core, the sun is reduced to little more than an unusually bright star, a cold spotlight that offers no more thermal comfort than a single candle in a frozen warehouse. By all rights, Europa should be a solid block of ice, frozen steadily down to its rocky center, a dead world preserved in the vacuum. But it is not dead, and the reason lies in the invisible rhythmic violence of gravity. Europa does not travel alone through the void. It is locked in a precise and ancient dance with its siblings, Io and Ganymede, and the massive gravitational anchor of Jupiter itself. This relationship is governed by a phenomenon known as orbital resonance, a mathematical perfection where the moons align in a strict 1:2:4 ratio. For every orbit Ganymede completes, Europa completes 2, and Io completes 4, a clockwork mechanism that has been ticking since the early days of the solar system. This resonance means that Europa is never truly at rest. As it circles the gas giant, it is caught in a gravitational tug-of-war. On one side, the immense mass of Jupiter pulls it inward, trapping it in a cosmic cage of orbital velocity. On the other, the passing gravity of Ganymede and Io yanks it backward, distorting its path into a slightly eccentric oval rather than a perfect circle. The consequence of this tug-of-war is physical. As Europa approaches the massive gravity well of Jupiter, the solid rock of its core is pulled and stretched toward the planet, elongating the moon like a rubber ball squeezed in a giant fist. Then as it swings away to the far side of its orbit, the gravity relaxes, and the moon snaps back into its spherical shape. This happens every 3.5 days, a relentless cycle of stretching and releasing that causes the solid ground to rise and fall by as much as 100 feet. If you stood on the surface of Europa, you would not feel this motion as an earthquake, but rather as a slow heaving breath of the world itself. But deep underground, this movement creates friction. Just as a paperclip becomes hot to the touch when you bend it back and forth rapidly, the rock inside Europa heats up from the constant flexing. This is the heartbeat of the moon, a conversion of pure orbital energy into thermal heat, generating gigawatts of power in the absolute dark. It is a reminder that in the cosmos, gravity is not just a force that holds things down. It is an engine. While we on Earth burn fossil fuels or split atoms to boil water for our turbines, Europa generates its oceans through the sheer elegance of motion. The heat rises from the rocky mantle, meeting the base of the ice shell, and there in the crushing dark it melts the bottom of the glacier, creating a hidden sea that has likely existed for billions of years. This water is not stagnant. It is driven by the same thermal currents that drive our own oceans, circulating nutrients and chemicals in a perpetual loop, protected from the radiation of space by the very ice that hides it from our view. Strategy block, audience phrases used: forbidden physics, cosmic cage, comforting darkness, data point, deep time, viral hooks, intellectual validation, exotic ice phases, domestic anchoring, diamond glass, scale shift, micro lattice, domestic anchoring, diamond glass, scale shift, micro lattice, production script. To understand how a liquid ocean can survive in the vacuum of space, we must turn our attention away from the hidden heat and look instead at the container that holds it. We often think of ice as a fragile, brittle thing, the thin layer that cracks under a boot on a winter morning, or the cubes that melt in a glass of water. But the ice of Europa and Ganymede is a different material entirely. It is not merely a frozen surface. It is a geological strata, a planetary crust that behaves less like the ice in your freezer and more like the granite of a mountain range. Helps astronomers understand the sheer scale of this barrier to imagine a wall of diamond-hard material, 10 to 20 miles thick. On Earth, the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench, is only 7 miles down. If you were to place that trench inside the ice shell of Europa, it would not even reach the halfway point. This is not a thin sheet of glass. It is a fortress, and it creates a boundary condition that is essential for life. You may notice that on Earth, our oceans are open to the sky. They interact with the atmosphere, the sunlight, and the weather. But on these moons, the ocean is sealed. It is a hermetic room locked away from the chaotic radiation of Jupiter and the freezing vacuum of the void. This isolation is not a prison. It is a cocoon. That is why we refer to this shell not just as a crust, but as a shield. It absorbs the bombardment of high-energy particles that would otherwise sterilize the water below, acting as a radiation suit for an entire world. But if we look closer, zooming in from the colossal scale of the moon to the microscopic architecture of the material itself, we find something even stranger. If you could hold a piece of this deep ice in your hand, you would see that its atomic structure is perfectly ordered. Water molecules, when given billions of years of stability, arrange themselves into a hexagonal lattice, a honeycomb of oxygen and hydrogen that is one of the strongest geometric shapes in nature. However, as we descend deeper into the shell, the rules of standard physics begin to bend. The pressure at the bottom of a 20-mile thick ice sheet is immense, crushing down with the weight of a mountain. Under this stress, water does not freeze into the standard ice 1 that we know on Earth. It transforms into exotic phases of matter known as ice 6 and ice 7. These are forms of forbidden physics that rarely exist on our planet. In these states, the crystal lattice becomes tightly packed, losing its empty space. The ice becomes denser than liquid water. It does not float, it sinks. It becomes a solid that is hot to the touch, yet remains frozen due to the crushing weight of the layers above it. This creates a strange, paradoxical transition zone where the ceiling of the ocean is not a hard, cold surface, but a slushy, warm, shifting layer of high-pressure crystals. It is also a dynamic system. This shell is not dead rock. Over billions of years, the ice flows. Like the slow, grinding movement of glaciers on Earth, the shell of Europa rotates and stretches. It is a solid that behaves like a fluid on the scale of deep time. Warm plumes of soft ice rise slowly from the ocean below, pushing their way toward the surface like wax in a lava lamp, carrying with them salts and minerals from the deep. This movement is the breathing of the moon. It means that the ocean is not cut off forever. The shell cycles the material, bringing the oxidants from the surface down into the dark and bringing the chemical memories of the deep up to the stars. It is a slow, silent conveyor belt that connects the radiation of the sky with the chemistry of the abyss. That is why looking at this ice is so mesmerizing. We are not looking at a static white ball. We are looking at a planetary skin that is constantly renewing itself, healing its cracks and shifting under the gravity of Jupiter. It does not crush the ocean. It cradles it. It provides the pressure required to keep the water liquid and the insulation required to keep it warm. We have looked at the container. We have traced the lines of its geometry and felt the weight of its diamond-hard lattice. Now the time has come to pass through the shield. We must leave the surface behind, melt through the miles of exotic ice, and descend into the liquid darkness that waits below. The barrier is behind us. The ocean is ahead. Stredici block. Audience phrases used: quiet chaos, deep time, frozen in time, viral hooks, the stained glass metaphor, scale of icebergs, production script. Before we sink into the depths, we must first understand the skin of this world. For decades, astronomers expected Europa to be a smooth billiard ball, a perfect sphere of white ice, frozen in the silence of the outer solar system. But the reality, revealed as we drift closer to the surface, is far more complex. We did not find a smooth marble. We found a shattered stained glass window. You may notice that the horizon is not flat, but textured with a complex geometry of ridges and fractures. This specific region is known to geologists as the Connemara chaos. It is a landscape where the rules of solidity seem to have momentarily failed, creating a jigsaw puzzle of icebergs the size of cities that have broken apart, drifted in a slushy matrix, and then refrozen in place. It is a snapshot of motion frozen in deep time. If you were to stand on one of these ridges, the first thing you would notice is the color. The ice is not pure white. It is crisscrossed by long reddish-brown streaks called linea. These are not scars of destruction, but the stretch marks of a breathing world. They are the veins of the moon, where warmer mineral-rich water from the hidden ocean has welled up through cracks in the shell, instantly freezing upon contact with the vacuum. The magnesium salts turn red under the harsh radiation of Jupiter, painting the surface in a map of its own internal history. There is a sound here too, though the atmosphere is too thin to carry it to human ears. If you could press your hand against the radiation-polished ground, you might feel the low, resonant groaning of the ice. It is the sound of the entire moon stretching. As Europa orbits, the immense gravity of Jupiter pulls at this shell, causing the ice to flex by as much as 100 feet every few days. It is a slow, rhythmic massage that generates the heat necessary to keep the ocean liquid. This chaotic surface is the proof of the calm below. The cracks tell us that the shell is not a tomb, but a blanket. It is moving because it is floating. And just as the shifting plates of Earth float on a mantle of rock, these rafts of diamond-hard ice are floating on a sea of water that is deeper than any ocean on our home planet. We have read the map written on the surface. Now we let gravity take hold. Strategy block, audience phrases used. Quiet chaos, deep time, frozen in amber, cosmic canvas, viral hooks, the stained glass paradox, the sound of ice, production script. To the naked eye of the early astronomers, Europa appeared as a perfect pale pearl suspended in the dark. We expected a smooth billiard ball, a simple sphere of white ice orbiting in silence. But as we drifted closer, shedding the distance of millions of miles, we found a shattered stained glass window, a world that has been broken and healed over and over again for eons. This is the face of a moon that is constantly being rewritten. If you were to glide over the equator, looking down at the landscape known as the Connemara chaos, you would see a terrain that defies the stillness of space. It looks like a vast jigsaw puzzle that has been scattered by a careless hand, then instantly frozen in place before the pieces could drift apart. Huge plates of ice, some the size of cities, have tilted and rotated, floating in a slush that solidified long ago. It is a snapshot of motion, caught in the amber of deep cold. You might notice the intricate network of reddish-brown lines that crisscross the surface, looking like the veins of a great sleeping eye. Astronomers call these features lineae. They are not merely cracks, they are the stretch marks of a growing, breathing world. When the gravity of Jupiter pulls at the moon, the ice shell flexes. It cracks open just enough to let the warmer, mineral-rich water from the deep ocean well up to the surface. The water boils into the vacuum, freezes instantly, and paints the ice with the salts of the hidden sea. It is a process of constant renewal, a slow-motion resurfacing that wipes away the craters of the past. That is why Europa is one of the smoothest objects in the solar system. While our own moon is pockmarked with the history of every asteroid strike since the dawn of time, Europa is clean. It heals its own wounds. The ice is not a dead shell. It is a dynamic skin, constantly cycling between the radiation of the surface and the warmth of the depths. If you could stand on one of these ridges in the absolute silence of the vacuum, you might feel a vibration through the soles of your boots. The ice is not silent, it groans. Just as a frozen lake on Earth sings with low, mournful thrums as the temperature shifts, Europa's shell is a symphony of low-frequency sound. It is the sound of unimaginable weight shifting, of distinct plates grinding against one another in a slow tectonic dance. But here, the movement is so gradual that to a human observer it would appear perfectly still. This region, the Connemara chaos, challenges our understanding of what it means for a world to be alive. We often look for green forests or flowing rivers as signs of vitality. But here, the vitality is geological. The chaos is not a sign of destruction. It is the signature of a heat engine working below, a confirmation that the core of the moon is still warm, still pushing against the cold, keeping the ocean liquid through the sheer force of friction. The surface is polished by radiation, smooth to the touch, yet broken into these jagged, beautiful geometries. It is a landscape of contradictions, broken yet whole, frozen yet moving, ancient yet constantly new. And as we pass over these ridges, watching the red veins disappear into the horizon, we begin to understand that the ice is not a barrier that separates us from the water. It is the vessel that preserves it. The chaos on the surface is the shield for the calm below. Strategy block, audience phrases used: deep time, the void, data point, comforting darkness, primitive eyes, viral hooks, domestic anchoring, the ice cube, glass of water, cosmic vertigo, Ganymede versus Mercury, domestic current script, leaving the chaotic fractured surface of Europa behind. We drift further outward, crossing another vast stretch of the Jovian vacuum to reach a world that demands a different kind of reverence. If Europa is a shattered stained glass window, this next world is a fortress of gray stone and ancient ice, a celestial body so massive that if it orbited the sun instead of Jupiter, it would be classified as a planet in its own right, dwarfing even Mercury with its immense shadow. This is Ganymede, the largest moon in our solar system, and a place where the physics of water begins to behave in ways that our primitive eyes would struggle to recognize. From a distance, it appears solid, a scarred and cratered relic of the early bombardment that shaped the neighborhood of the gas giants. But this rugged exterior is merely a shell, another mask hiding a secret that challenges our understanding of how oceans are built. On Earth, and indeed on Europa, we are accustomed to a simple binary order. The ice floats on top and the water sits beneath it, resting on a bed of rock. You see this every time you place an ice cube in a glass. The solid is lighter than the liquid, and so it rises. But Ganymede is so large, and its gravity so commanding, that it forces the water into a complex layered architecture that exists nowhere else. As we descend through the crust, we do not find a single continuous sea. Instead, we find a structure that resembles a vast planetary layer cake, or a club sandwich made of frozen elements. The pressure here is so intense that it fundamentally changes the crystal lattice of the water molecule. It creates forms of ice that do not exist in our daily lives. Exotic, heavy ices, known as Ice 3, Ice 5, and Ice 6. These are not the buoyant crystals that float in your drink. They are dense, heavy minerals that sink like stones, and so the ocean of Ganymede is built in stacks. Imagine descending through the first shell of rock-hard ice to find a liquid ocean. But if you were to dive to the bottom of that sea, you would not hit rock. You would hit a floor of high-pressure ice, a second solid shell created by the crushing weight of the water above. And if you could drill through that second floor, you would not find the core. You would find another ocean, a second isolated layer of liquid water trapped between the heavy ice above and even heavier ice below. A perfectly sealed room where the water waits in total stillness. It is a concept that feels alien to us, yet it suggests that Ganymede is not just holding an ocean, it is holding a collection of oceans, each one separated from the other by miles of frozen diamond. In these deep stacked chambers, there are no storms to disturb the silence. There is no wind to whip the surface into waves. There is only the comforting darkness and the immense crushing pressure that holds everything in a state of suspended animation. It is a reminder that in the deep void, water does not always flow. Sometimes it builds, it constructs high-rise apartments of liquid and solid, preserving the chemistry of the early solar system in airtight vaults that have likely remained unopened since the beginning of deep time. While Europa is active and chaotic, constantly resurfacing itself, Ganymede is the silent librarian, keeping its volumes of water stacked, ordered, and still, waiting for a reader that may never come. Strategy block, audience phrases used: deep time, data point, the void, ancestral fear, viral hooks, the paradox of the dead world, the great library metaphor, production script. Further out, beyond the rhythmic dance of the inner moons, lies a world that has chosen a different path. Callisto does not participate in the gravitational tug-of-war that warms its siblings. It drifts alone, the outermost of the Galilean satellites, a dark, icy sphere that appears at first glance to be completely frozen in time. It is often called the most battered object in the solar system. But to call it battered is to misunderstand its nature. Callisto is the great library of the Jovian system, because it has no active volcanoes to pave over its past, and no shifting tectonic plates to swallow its history. Every impact that has struck this moon for 4 billion years is still there, preserved in the ice. It is a world of saturation, where new craters can only form by erasing the old ones, creating a landscape that is less a surface and more a palimpsest of deep time. If you stood on Callisto, you would see the history of the solar system written in the ground beneath your boots. The horizon is not a smooth line, but a jagged script of ancient collisions. Craters sit inside larger craters, a fractal pattern of gray and white that tells the story of the heavy bombardment era, a time when the solar system was still chaotic and young. There is no wind to smooth these edges. There is no rain to wash the dust away. There is only the eternal vacuum and the silent accumulation of history. For decades, astronomers believed this world was dead, a geologically inactive fossil. It is not locked in the orbital resonance that heats Europa and Ganymede. It floats in a quiet, lonely circle, far from the intense radiation belts that bathe the inner moons. By all conventional laws of thermodynamics, Callisto should be solid ice all the way down to its rock core. It should be a cold, stone-hard monument to the past. But nature often defies our models. When the Galileo spacecraft flew past this silent witness, it detected that familiar ghostly signature, the bending of Jupiter's magnetic field. Even here, in the coldest, quietest reaches of the system, something is moving beneath the crust. The data suggests that Callisto, too, cradles a secret ocean. Perhaps it is not a warm, churning sea like Europa's, but a salty, slushy layer, kept liquid not by the friction of gravity, but by the slow decay of radioactive elements, deep within its rock and the insulating blanket of its thick, cratered shell. It is a reminder that life, or at least the water that supports it, does not always need the drama of tidal heating or the violence of volcanoes. Sometimes it simply needs insulation. Callisto protects its water not with active repair, but with the sheer, stubborn thickness of its history, holding a mirror to the universe while guarding a liquid secret in the dark. Strategy block, audience phrases used: comforting darkness, the void, drift, ancestral fear, primitive eyes, viral hooks, sensory deprivation, the ceiling metaphor, safety, production script. To understand what truly lives below these fractured shells, we have to leave the surface behind. We have spent enough time looking at the shield. Now we must descend into what it protects. Imagine standing on the radiation-scoured plains of Europa. The silence here is absolute, a vacuum where sound cannot travel, and the only sensation is the cold, hard reality of the ice beneath your feet. But we are not here to walk. We are here to sink. Picture a probe, a slender cylinder of metal and warmth, designed not to fly through the air, but to melt through the ages. As it engages its heating elements, the ice directly beneath it begins to weep, turning from rock-hard crystal into a small pocket of water. The probe slips downward, and the water above it refreezes instantly, sealing the hole, locking us inside the moon. We are no longer in space. We are inside the skin of the world. As we descend, the light begins to change in a way that our primitive eyes have never seen on Earth. At first, the ice is a blinding opaque white, shattered by the radiation of the surface. But as we sink deeper, passing the first mile of the crust, the white deepens into a heavy, translucent blue. It is the color of compressed time. Here, the ice is under such immense pressure that it behaves less like a rock and more like a slow-moving plastic, flowing over centuries in a geological dream. You may notice that the temperature actually rises the deeper we go. We are moving away from the frozen vacuum of space and toward the tidal heart of the moon. The blue light of the sun, filtering through miles of frozen water, begins to fade. It turns to a deep indigo, then a twilight gray, and finally it vanishes completely. We are now in the comforting darkness. This is not the scary dark of an empty room. It is the heavy, safe darkness of a deep ocean. And then the resistance gives way. The probe slips through the final layer of the ice shell and emerges into the void below. But this void is not empty. It is heavy. It is wet. We have entered the hidden sea. If you were to look up from this depth, you would not see stars. You would see a ceiling of ice, a massive, jagged sky that stretches from horizon to horizon, protecting this ocean from the cold indifference of the universe above. The water here is black, mineral-rich, and humming with a silence that is louder than noise. It is a place where the weight of the world above acts as a blanket, holding the ocean in a permanent pressurized embrace. We are floating in a sea that has not seen the sun for 4 billion years, yet it is likely the most stable environment in the solar system. Here, in the deep, there is no weather to weather. There is only the drift. Strategy block, audience phrases used: comforting darkness, boiling water, the void, ancient, deep time, viral hooks, primitive technology irony, boiling water, domestic anchoring, fireplace, cradle, domestic scene script. If we allow gravity to take us further, slowly sinking past the suspended silence of the middle depths, we eventually reach the solid floor of this hidden world. It is a descent into a darkness so complete that our primitive eyes would see nothing. Yet this is not a place of death. As we approach the rocky mantle that forms the core of the moon, the water begins to change. It loses the biting chill of the ice shell above and begins to accept a gentle rising warmth. You may notice that the water here is thick with minerals, tasting of salt and iron, swirling in slow, heavy currents that have not stopped moving. Rising from the seafloor are vast, towering structures of porous rock, standing like silent cathedrals in the gloom. These are the hydrothermal vents. On Earth, we often think of geological activity as violent, volcanoes exploding, plates crashing, but here, under the crushing weight of the ocean, the geology is a slow, rhythmic exhalation. The vents release plumes of mineral-rich water. It is a continuous, steady flow, like smoke rising from a chimney on a cold winter night, drifting upward to warm the room. This is the engine of the moon. It is arguably the most efficient power plant in the solar system. On Earth, humanity has spent centuries building complex machines, burning ancient carbon and splitting unstable atoms, all for the singular, somewhat primitive goal of boiling water to turn a turbine. We struggle to generate heat. But here, in the quiet dark of Europa, gravity does the work for free, kneading the core of the moon and boiling the water in a cycle that has lasted for billions of years. In the dark, this heat is a cradle. The plumes of hot water mix with the cold ocean, creating a gradient of temperature where chemistry can begin to dance. It is a mixing bowl of the fundamental ingredients for life, protected from the radiation of space by the ice, and protected from the chaos of weather by the depth. There is no sunlight here to drive photosynthesis, so the energy comes from the stone itself. It is a process called chemosynthesis, a way of drawing life directly from the heat of the planet rather than the light of the star. If you were to float here, suspended in the neutral buoyancy of the deep, you would feel a sense of absolute permanence. The storms of Jupiter rage millions of miles away, and the vacuum of space is an abstract concept that does not apply. Here, there is only the warmth of the vent, the flow of the current, and the comforting darkness that wraps around everything like heavy velvet. It is a reminder that the void is not empty, it is merely waiting. The energy here is not frantic or desperate, it is patient, holding the memory of heat in a world that should be frozen solid. Strategy block, audience phrases used: comforting darkness, deep time, the void, ancient, viral hooks, domestic anchoring, hearth, summer, paradigm shift, sun is not required for warmth. Production script, Chapter 8. The vents. This heat does not vanish into the water. It concentrates, gathering in specific locations along the seafloor. Here we find structures that look like chimneys, towering columns of mineral deposits that have grown over thousands of years, layer by layer in the absolute stillness of the deep. We call them black smokers, a name that implies fire and smoke. But in this alien environment, they are fountains of creation. If you could stand on this ocean floor, protected from the immense weight of the water above, you would see these vents not as violent scars, but as gentle clouds of darkness rising into the lighter blue of the surrounding sea. It is a slow-motion unraveling of chemistry. Water seeps into the porous rock, drawn down toward the hot core where it gathers minerals, iron, sulfur, and magnesium, before rising back up in a slow, steady plume. It is a process known as chemosynthesis. On Earth, we are used to the idea that all energy comes from the sun, cascading down through the atmosphere to the plants and the oceans. But here, in the shadow of Jupiter, the rules are different. The energy comes from below. It is the gravitational friction of the moon's orbit, converted into heat and released into the water as a mineral-rich fluid. This creates a stable, temperate zone in the middle of the freezing void. The water near these vents is warm. It holds a temperature that would feel familiar to your hand, a pocket of eternal summer buried beneath 20 miles of ice. It is a reminder that the universe does not need light to be warm. It only needs gravity and time. The plumes drift upward, carrying nutrients that swirl in the currents, creating a haze of potential energy that hangs in the water like smoke in a still room. There is no turbulence here, only the silent, rhythmic flow of the moon exhaling its internal heat into the ocean. In the dark, the heat is a cradle. It provides a stable chemical garden where the building blocks of existence can mix and merge without interference. For eons, these vents have been pumping their minerals into the dark, creating an environment that has remained unchanged while the surface of the solar system was battered by comets and solar storms. Down here, there is only safety. The ice shell above acts as a shield, and the rock below acts as a hearth, keeping the water liquid, keeping the chemistry active, and maintaining a silent vigil in the deep. Strategy block, audience phrases used: comforting darkness, the void, drift, sleepy science, primitive eyes, viral hooks, domestic anchoring, fireflies, speculative wonder, alien light, production script. In this eternal night, where the sun is a forgotten memory, you might expect a world of absolute blackness, but nature has a way of painting with light, even in the deepest shadows. On Earth, we see this in the soft green pulse of fireflies hovering over a summer field, or in the neon blue waves that crash against a midnight shore. It is a reminder that life does not just reflect the light of a star. Sometimes it creates its own. And so as we drift through the heavy, silent waters of Europa, we may not be surrounded by darkness at all. Instead, the void might be filled with a soft, rhythmic constellation of living stars. We call this bioluminescence, a chemical miracle where energy is transformed into a cold, gentle glow. It is possible that in these hidden seas, where eyes have never seen the sun, life has evolved to speak in flashes of blue and green, a visual language shimmering in the deep. Imagine drifting through this submerged cathedral. You are weightless, suspended in a pressure that holds you like a heavy blanket. Around you, small points of light begin to ignite, fading in and out like breathing. These are not monsters of the deep, but simple, graceful forms, perhaps like the translucent jellyfish of our own oceans, trailing long, delicate filaments that glow with a faint spectral light. They drift on the thermal currents rising from the vents below, riding the warmth upward in a slow, circular dance that has continued for millions of years. There is no hurry here. The frantic pace of the surface world, with its day and night cycles, does not exist. Here, time is measured only by the slow pulse of these lights. One flash calls out to another, a silent signal across the water, creating a web of illumination that stretches for miles. It is a conversation of pure light, a biological internet connecting the life of the moon in a way that our primitive eyes can barely understand. This bioluminescent dream is powered not by photosynthesis, but by the chemical richness of the water itself. These creatures do not need to hunt in the way we understand it. They simply exist, absorbing the minerals and the heat, turning the harsh chemistry of the universe into a soft, ambient glow. It is a peaceful existence, floating in a world that is protected from the radiation of Jupiter and the vacuum of space, safe within the shell. If you were to float among them, you would feel no fear, only a profound sense of connection. The water is warm, the lights are hypnotic, and the silence is absolute. It is a place where the universe dreams of itself, where the boundary between the living and the non-living blurs into a single flowing experience. You are no longer an observer from Earth. You are part of the current, drifting alongside these ancient, glowing travelers, moving slowly through the comforting darkness, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, simply being part of the light. Strategy block, audience phrases used: stardust, the void, data point, primitive eyes, comforting darkness, viral hooks, domestic anchoring, the water glass, cosmic vertigo, universal chemistry, production script. And as these gentle lights fade back into the deep, we are left with the substance that holds them. We are left with the water itself. It is easy to feel isolated when we look up at the gas giants, seeing them as cold, alien worlds made of storms and pressure that our primitive eyes can barely understand. But if you could reach out across the vacuum and cup a handful of Europa's ocean in your hands, you would find something startlingly familiar. It is the same water that sits in the glass on your nightstand. It is the same water that makes up the clouds drifting over your roof. And it is the same water that flows through your own veins as you lie here. The universe, for all its vastness and strange dark energy, is built from a shared recipe. To understand this connection, we must look at the atoms themselves. Every molecule of water, whether it is frozen in the rings of Saturn or crashing against the shores of a Pacific island, is a marriage of two ancient histories. The hydrogen atoms were born in the first few moments of the universe, less than 3 minutes after the beginning of time, drifting through the void long before the first star ignited. They are the oldest things you will ever touch. The oxygen, however, came much later. It was forged in the hearts of massive stars, cooked in the nuclear furnaces of the deep cosmos, and then scattered across the galaxy when those stars gently exhaled their layers into the dark. These two elements found each other in the cold silence of space, bonding together to form the ice that would eventually build worlds. That is why looking at Jupiter's moons is not like looking at a stranger. It is like looking at a distant sibling. The ice shell of Ganymede and the glaciers of Earth are made of the same stardust, cooled by the same physics and governed by the same quiet laws of chemistry. We are not separated by the nature of our matter, but only by the distance of our drift. In this way, the solar system is not a collection of dry rocks separated by nothingness. It is a single vast archipelago of moisture. We used to believe that Earth was a lonely oasis, a rare blue marble in a dry dark, but we now know that the water is everywhere. It is waiting beneath the red dust of Mars. It is steaming from the geysers of Enceladus, and it is sleeping in the comets that wander the outer rim. You are part of this hydrologic cycle that extends far beyond the atmosphere of our planet. When you drink, you are participating in a ritual that connects you to the deep oceans of Europa. You are a vessel for the most common compound in the universe. We are not observers looking into a fishbowl. We are simply swimming in a different part of the same stream. So as we prepare to leave these hidden seas, let the feeling of distance dissolve. The cold of space is not a barrier, but a preservative, keeping these oceans safe until we are ready to find them. The water is the bridge. It flows through the vacuum in the form of ice. It flows through the moons in the form of hidden seas, and it flows through you in the form of life. You are connected to the ice, to the dark, and to the quiet rhythm of the tides. Strategy block, audience phrases used: blue marble, star stuff, in the deep, the void, viral hooks, circular resolution, the bookend, paradigm shift. The universe is a nursery, not a desert. Production script. When we began this descent, we looked back at our own planet, the blue marble, floating alone in what we thought was a desert of vacuum. We told ourselves a story that water is rare, and that life requires the warmth of a yellow sun to survive. But the moons of Jupiter have whispered a different truth to us tonight. We are not the only blue marble. We are simply the only one where the water is on the outside, exposed to the open sky. In the rest of the cosmos, the oceans are introverts. They wrap themselves in miles of diamond-hard ice, turning inward to find their warmth not from the star above, but from the gravity below. This is a comforting thought. It means that the universe is not a dry, hostile void waiting to extinguish a fragile spark. It is wet, it is warm, and it is waiting. It is a nursery that values protection over display, keeping its most precious treasures safe in the dark, deep pressure of the interior. So as you drift away from these distant worlds, remember that the silence of space is not empty. It is heavy with potential. The water in your glass, the blood in your veins, and the oceans of Europa are all singing the same chemical song, tuned to the same laws of physics. You are not separated from these hidden seas. You are made of the same star stuff, cooled down and settled into a quiet, breathing form. There is no need to worry about the cold. The universe has built blankets of ice 20 miles thick to keep the heat inside. There is no need to worry about the dark. In the deep, the dark is a canvas for bioluminescent dreams. Everything is exactly where it needs to be, held in place by the invisible, loving hands of gravity. The ice protects the sea protects the life, and the gravity holds it all in a gentle, eternal rhythm. You are part of that rhythm. Sleep now. Strategy block, audience phrases used: boiling water, data point, the void, cosmic cage, drift, viral hooks. the dry Earth paradox, the Galileo anomaly, the tidal heartbeat focus, high-density imagery, rhythmic sentence structures, lullaby lattice, production script, the hidden seas, why Earth is a desert, the hook. We call Earth the blue marble, a water world unique in a dry, silent universe. We tell ourselves that liquid water is rare, a precious accident that only happened here, near the warmth of our star. But this is a story we tell ourselves to feel special. And the math suggests it is spectacularly wrong. If you look at the solar system as a whole, Earth is actually a dry planet. It is a desert compared to the moons of Jupiter, which hold oceans 30 times deeper than the Marianas Trench. This presents a paradox that keeps astronomers awake at night. How can liquid water exist so far from the sun, where temperatures hover near absolute zero, and the sunlight is nothing more than a cold, bright star? This isn't a story of cold, dark isolation. It is a story of hidden warmth, where the most life-sustaining environments in the galaxy are not bathing in sunlight, but sleeping beneath the ice. Tonight, we are going to peel back that ice. By the end of this journey, you will understand why the most important ocean in the solar system is not the one you can see from your window, but the one waiting in the dark, 400 million miles away. To understand this hidden water, we must first understand the silence that hides it. Imagine floating in the space near Jupiter. It is a place of immense heavy radiation, a magnetic storm that screams across the radio spectrum. In the center sits the gas giant, a swirling ball of storms large enough to swallow 1,000 Earths, and orbiting this monster are the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. For centuries, when astronomers looked up at these moons through their telescopes, they saw only dead rock and ice. They saw frozen, static worlds that had been cold since the beginning of time. It made sense. They are too far from the sun to melt. They should be solid ice, all the way down to the core. But in the 1990s, we sent a robotic explorer named Galileo to take a closer look. It was a primitive machine by modern standards, basically a collection of cameras and sensors strapped to a radio dish. But it carried a magnetometer, a device designed to feel the magnetic heartbeat of the giant planet. As the probe flew past the moon Europa, something strange happened to the data. The magnetic field lines of Jupiter, which should have passed through the moon as if it were a ghost, bent. They twisted. A dead rock cannot bend magnetism. It is electrically neutral. Only a conductive fluid can warp a magnetic field like that. This single data point changed everything. It meant that beneath the frozen white shell of Europa, there was something moving, something conducting electricity, something vast. The only candidate that fits the physics is salt water. Not pockets of water, but a global ocean, wrapping around the entire moon, connecting pole to pole. It was a shock to the system. We realized that while we were busy boiling water on Earth to spin turbines and make electricity, Jupiter had been keeping a secret ocean liquid for billions of years, without any help from the sun. The probe showed us that the ice shell was not a tombstone, but a shield, and this shield is thick. We estimate that the crust of Europa is 10 to 15 miles of solid, granite-hard ice. To the human eye, standing on the surface, it would look like the most desolate place in the cosmos. The radiation would be lethal in minutes. The sky would be black, dominated by the terrifying, beautiful bulk of Jupiter hanging overhead. But if you could put your ear to the ground, you might hear the groaning of the ice. You might feel the shudder of a world that is not dead, but sleeping. This discovery forced us to rewrite the rules of what makes a world habitable. We used to think life required the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, just the right distance from a star. But Europa is far outside that zone. It is in the freezer, yet it is warm. This leads us to the inevitable question. If the sun isn't heating this water, what is? The answer lies in the invisible, rhythmic hands of gravity. Gravity is usually described as a force that holds things down. You feel it right now, pulling you into your bed, anchoring you to the planet. But gravity is also a force that stretches. In the Jupiter system, gravity is a dance. The moons Io, Europa, and Ganymede are locked in a phenomenon called orbital resonance. It is a precise mathematical waltz. For every 4 times Io orbits Jupiter, Europa orbits twice, and Ganymede orbits once, a perfect 1-to-4 ratio. This resonance means that these moons line up with each other at regular intervals. Every time they pass, they tug on one another. And every time they approach Jupiter, the massive gravity of the gas giant pulls on them, stretching the solid rock of their cores into an oval shape. Imagine a rubber ball in your hand. If you squeeze it and release it over and over again, the rubber begins to get warm. The friction of the material moving against itself generates heat. This is exactly what is happening to Europa. As it approaches the massive gravity well of Jupiter, the solid rock of its core is pulled and released, creating a rhythmic friction that warms the moon from the inside out. It is a planetary massage, a constant kneading of the core that turns kinetic energy into thermal energy. This is why the water doesn't freeze. The heat isn't coming from above, it is coming from below. It is a heartbeat of gravity pumping warmth into the ocean from the seafloor up. This creates a unique environment. On Earth, our oceans are heated from the top by the sun, creating a warm surface and a cold deep. On Europa, it is the opposite. The surface is frozen solid, exposed to the vacuum, but the bottom is warm. It suggests that the floor of this hidden ocean might be covered in hydrothermal vents, black smokers that spew mineral-rich, superheated water into the dark. We know these vents exist on Earth, deep in the Atlantic and Pacific, far from any sunlight. And we know that on Earth, these vents are teeming with life, strange alien life that doesn't need the sun, doesn't need photosynthesis, and doesn't know that the surface world exists. So when we look at Jupiter, we are not looking at a solar system of dead rocks. We are looking at a system of engines. The gravity of the giant planet is the battery, and the moons are the machines, turning that gravity into heat, into water, and perhaps into life. It is a comforting thought. It means that the universe does not need a star to create a cradle. It can build one out of the darkness itself, using nothing but the weight of a planet and the rhythm of an orbit. Now that we understand the engine, we must look at the container. The ocean of Europa is not like the Atlantic. It is not open to the sky. It is sealed inside a spherical shell of ice that is harder than concrete. We often think of ice as slippery or fragile, because on Earth we exist near its melting point. But at the temperatures of the outer solar system, ice behaves differently. It becomes a mineral. It has the compressive strength of rock. This shell acts as a cosmic womb. It separates the delicate liquid interior from the harsh radioactive vacuum of space. It is a barrier of silence. If you were to descend through this ice, you would pass through different phases of matter. The top layer is brittle, shattered by the radiation and the impacts of meteorites. It is a chaotic landscape of ridges and cracks, where the ice has been broken and refrozen 1,000 times. But as you go deeper, the pressure builds. The ice becomes warm and plastic. It starts to flow like a slow-moving glacier. It is here, miles beneath the surface, that the ice acts as a conveyor belt, slowly cycling material from the surface down to the ocean and bringing water from the ocean up to the surface. This is crucial. The surface is bathed in radiation, which creates oxygen and other chemicals. The ocean below has the heat and the water. The ice shell is the bridge that connects them. It is a slow geological breathing mechanism that might be feeding the ocean with the ingredients for life. But the physics of this ice gets even stranger. On Earth, ice floats. It is less dense than water. This is why lakes freeze from the top down. But under the extreme pressures of these deep moons, water can form exotic types of ice. Scientists call them Ice V, Ice 6, and Ice 7. These are crystal structures that only exist under crushing weight. They are denser than liquid water. This means that on some of the larger moons, like Ganymede, there might be layers of ice at the bottom of the ocean. Imagine a club sandwich of worlds. A layer of ice on top, then a layer of water, then a layer of high-pressure ice, then another layer of water, a stacked ocean, where different environments exist in total isolation from one another. It is a concept that breaks our intuition. We are used to the water cycle of Earth, rain, river, ocean, cloud. But here, the water is static. It does not rain. It does not flow into rivers. It simply waits. It sits in the dark, held between walls of diamond-hard crystal, protected from the chaos of the universe for billions of years. This protection is key. The universe is a violent place. Supernovas explode, asteroids collide, stars flare, but inside the shell of Europa or Ganymede, none of that matters. The ice absorbs the blows. The ice blocks the radiation, Inside, the water is calm. It is a perfect stasis, a place where chemistry can happen undisturbed for eons. While Earth has gone through mass extinctions, asteroid impacts, and ice ages that froze the surface, the oceans of Jupiter have likely remained exactly the same. They are the most stable environments in the solar system, and this stability is what makes them so fascinating. If life began there 4 billion years ago, it has had an uninterrupted stretch of time to evolve, to adapt, to drift in the dark currents. We have looked at the container. We have looked at the engine. Now we must descend into the landscape itself. We must look at the scars on the surface that tell the story of the water below. If you look at a high-resolution image of Europa, you will notice that it does not look like a cratered dead moon. It looks like a broken eggshell. It looks like a stained glass window that has been shattered and put back together by a blind artist. Astronomers call these regions chaos terrains. Specifically, the Connemara chaos is a region where the ice crust has been broken into massive city-sized rafts that have tilted, rotated, and frozen back into place. To understand what this means, imagine a frozen lake on Earth in the spring. As the water below warms up, the ice sheet cracks. Icebergs break free and float for a while, turning and drifting, before the temperature drops and freezes them in place again. This is exactly what we see on Europa, but the scale is monumental. These icebergs are miles high. The cracks between them are filled with a reddish-brown material that scientists believe is salt magnesium sulfate, or perhaps simple table salt, blasted by radiation until it turns red. These cracks are called lineae. They crisscross the moon like veins, and they are not just scars, they are stretch marks. Because Europa's orbit is an oval, the moon gets squeezed and stretched every few days. This flexing causes the ice shell to crack. Water from below rushes up to fill the gap, boiling into the vacuum, and then instantly freezing. It is a planetary resurfacing project that never ends. This is why Europa is so smooth. There are almost no craters. On a moon this old, there should be thousands of impact scars from asteroids, but Europa wipes them away. If a meteor hits, the ice eventually relaxes or water fills the hole. It heals itself. It is a reminder that this world is active. It is dynamic. It is constantly erasing its history and writing a new one. And the reddish color of these veins tells us something profound. It tells us that the ocean is interacting with the surface. The salt from the deep is making it to the top, and if the salt can get up, then the oxygen from the surface can get down. We used to look at these red streaks and see rust or dirt. Now we look at them and see a circulatory system. We see a world that is trying to breathe. As we drift over these chaos terrains in our imagination, notice the lack of mountains. There are no high peaks on Europa. The ice is not strong enough to support them. Over time, any large mountain would simply sink into the warmer ice below. Like a stone sitting on a block of wax, everything here is flattened by gravity and time. It is a world of low relief, a horizon that stretches out flat and white, broken only by the endless tangled ridges of the ice. It is a desolate beauty, a silent, frozen wasteland that hides a secret of unimaginable volume. But Europa is not the only keeper of secrets. As we move outward from Jupiter, we encounter a moon that dwarfs it in size, and perhaps in mystery. We leave the chaos of Europa and drift outward to Ganymede. This is the king of moons. It is the largest moon in the solar system, bigger even than the planet Mercury. If it were orbiting the sun instead of Jupiter, it would be considered a planet in its own right. Ganymede is different. It is not as active as Europa. Its surface is a mix of dark, ancient regions covered in craters and lighter, younger regions that look like they have been smoothed over by ice flows. But the real difference lies deep inside. Ganymede is so large that its own gravity creates immense pressure in its interior. This pressure changes the physics of the water. Models suggest that Ganymede's ocean is not a single layer. It is likely a multi-layered system, separated by different phases of ice. Imagine descending into this world. First, you pass through the outer shell of rock-hard ice eye. Then you hit a layer of liquid water. But as you go deeper, the pressure becomes so intense that the water molecules are forced into a crystal lattice. Turning into ice 3, you would hit a floor of ice. But if you could drill through that floor, you might find another ocean beneath it, and below that, a layer of ice 5. And below that, another ocean. It is a structure of silence and separation. Each layer of water is a sealed room, a closed ecosystem that has never touched the others. The deepest layer of this ocean might be touching the rocky mantle of the moon. This is the most important interface. Where water touches rock, chemistry happens. Minerals dissolve, energy is exchanged. This is where the fuel for life is created. But in the upper layers, the water is trapped between ice and ice. It is a pure, lonely environment, a place where the water waits in total stillness, held in the dark by the weight of the world above it. We can only guess what the conditions are like in these sandwich oceans. The pressure would be crushing, the darkness would be absolute, but water is stubborn. Even here, it refuses to freeze completely. It finds a way to remain liquid, aided by the salt and the pressure. Ganymede teaches us that oceans can come in many forms. They don't have to be on the surface. They don't have to be open to the air. They can be buried, stacked, and hidden. It is a reminder of how little we know. We look at the surface and see a ball of rock and ice, but inside it is a complex, layered world with more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. And yet there is one more moon in this family. The silent one. The one that everyone thought was dead. Callisto is the outermost of the Galilean moons. For a long time, astronomers dismissed it. It is the most heavily cratered object in the solar system. Its surface is a record of violence, covered in the scars of every impact it has suffered for 4 billion years. Because it has so many craters, we assumed it was geologically dead. If it were active, like Europa, the craters would have been erased, but Callisto keeps its scars. It suggests that the surface hasn't changed since the early days of the solar system. It is a dark, dusty ball of ice and rock. It does not participate in the orbital resonance dance. It orbits too far out. It does not get squeezed and stretched by Jupiter's gravity. It simply drifts, alone and cold. But when the Galileo probe flew past Callisto, it found a surprise. It found the same magnetic signature that it found at Europa. Callisto, the dead moon, the silent witness, also has an ocean. It shouldn't be there. There is no tidal heating to keep it warm. There is no major radioactive core to heat it from within. And yet the data is clear. Beneath that battered ancient crust, there is a layer of liquid water. We believe this ocean is preserved by antifreeze ammonia. The water inside Callisto is likely rich in ammonia, which lowers the freezing point of water significantly. This allows it to stay liquid even at very low temperatures. It is a slushy, viscous ocean, a cold, slow-moving sea that flows beneath the rock. If you stood on Callisto, you would feel a profound sense of stillness. The radiation from Jupiter is weak here. The sky is filled with stars that do not twinkle. The ground beneath your boots is a library of cosmic history, preserving the record of the solar system's violent youth, and beneath that library, the water flows. Even here, at the edge of the system where the energy is lowest, the water persists. It seems that the universe wants to create oceans. It creates them in the heat, and it creates them in the cold. It creates them under the light of a star, and it creates them in the dark of a moon. Earth is not the standard. Earth is the odd one out. The standard ocean of our solar system is a dark, hidden, ice-capped sea. We have looked at the surfaces, we have mapped the cracks and the craters. But to truly understand these worlds, we have to leave the surface behind. We have to sink. Imagine we are a probe designed to melt through the crust of Europa. We land on the chaotic ice. It is hard as granite, cold as the void. We activate our heating element, and we begin to descend. At first, we are surrounded by white. The ice is full of bubbles, ancient pockets of gas trapped for millions of years. As we go deeper, the bubbles disappear. The pressure squeezes them out. The ice becomes clear blue and then black. We are miles down now. The weight of the ice above us is immense. We are no longer in the solar system of light and telescopes. We are in the solar system of pressure and sound. The ice groans around us. It shifts. We are passing through the slow-motion tectonics of the shell, and then finally we break through. The ice ends. The water begins. We are floating in the dark. There is no sunlight here. There has never been sunlight here, but it is not empty. The water is thick with minerals. It tastes of salt and sulfur. It conducts electricity. Switch to your audio sensors. The silence of space is gone. Here, sound travels. You might hear the distant rumble of the ice cracking miles above. a sound like thunder rolling across a heavy sky. You might hear the hiss of the vents miles below. It is a sensory deprivation tank the size of a world, a place of absolute focus. As we drift down, gravity pulls us gently toward the core. We are falling into a dream. The water is not cold here. It is kept warm by the pressure and the insulation of the shell. It is a stable, eternal bath. This is the environment where life on Earth likely began. Before there were plants, before there were animals, there were simple cells clustering around heat sources in the deep ocean. And as we descend toward the seafloor of Europa, we have to wonder, is there something down there clustering around the warmth?